Hey guys. All right, so we are going to continue on with our notes about World War One. Today we're going to kind of talk more about the U.S.'s involvement in the war, what caused the U.S. to get involved. But before we do that, since we're all going to be home for a while, if you would like to watch any World War One movies because you want to be an overachiever, some good movies are War Horse, Flyboys, Joy. This be like Merry Christmas. This one right here. Now it is in French, but it has subtitles. And then Passchendaele, that one's like really, really violent. Maybe don't watch that one. I like that thing. Yeah, maybe don't watch that one. I should take that one off. But anyway, some movie options. Another option is 1917, which came out. If we were still in school, I was going to show you a short clip from this movie, but we are not. But this really shows you kind of what trench warfare was like. And I really like at least the beginning of, like all of it, but the beginning of the movie has a really good scene of trench warfare. Now, you all have been working on your Game of Life PowerPoint, hopefully. And by working on it, you've learned about new weapons used in World War I, like machine guns, poison gas, which could cause blindness, choking, burns. It didn't usually cause death, but it could, in some cases, lead to death. You had tanks, which the British actually invented to get across no man's land, which was the flat area between the two trenches. You had airplanes, and airplanes have been invented for a little bit, but this was the first time they were actually used in combat. You have submarines, and the Germans' submarines were called U-boats. We got planes. Now, trench warfare, and I know you learned about this last year, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it, but I did want to mention that in trench warfare, it's very hard to gain land because when you come out of your trench, you are in no man's land and you are an open target. You're on this flat surface usually. The other side can see you very easily. So it's very easy to get shot at when you're in no man's land. So that's why trench warfare, it was, a lot of the soldiers described it as really boring most of the time because you're just sitting there in a stalemate. You're not really fighting a ton. You do have small bursts of intense fighting, but for the most part, you're in a stalemate. Now, despite all of this bad stuff, there was one positive thing. So in 1914, on Christmas, the British troops and the German troops ended up having a truce over Christmas. They came out of their trenches and they celebrated together. They cut each other's hair. They played games. They partied. They drank. They traded stuff. They shared stuff. And there was no fighting whatsoever. Then the next day, they went back to fighting. But it is a neat little interesting tidbit. Christmas truce of 1914, they stopped fighting on Christmas to celebrate. Didn't happen again, but it's a very neat little tidbit. So the movie, the French movie Joyeux Noel, I know I'm butchering that, is about this Christmas truce. Okay, so why did America join the war? Now, there are 5 reasons America joined the war, and we're going to talk about all 5 of them really quick. So first, Germany's reliance on unrestricted submarine warfare. That means that Germany was not following the rules of war. They were targeting civilians. So unrestricted, they weren't following any rules. They were ignoring all of these rules. Because in war, you're not really supposed to target civilians. They're seen as innocent. Now, targeting civilians does happen, but you're not really supposed to. So they would use their U-boats and they would target civilian ships. And one of these ships was the Lusitania. So it was a British passenger ship. It had British citizens, American citizens, and the Germans torpedoed it and it sank. Now, the British obviously were very upset about this. The Americans were very upset about this. And to avoid the Americans getting into the conflict, Germany agreed to stop using unrestricted submarine warfare. They agreed to follow some of the rules. Now, Germany's excuse of why they shot this ship was that the British were hiding weapons in the bottom of it. So technically it was a warship and it was allowed. The British denied that. However, later it came out that the British actually did have weapons in the bottom of the ship. So this was a New York Times article. It said Lusitania sunk by a submarine, probably 1,000 dead. Twice torpedoed off Irish coast, sinks in 15 minutes. Americans aboard included Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt, who we talked about in the Gilded Age, he ended up dying on this. He gave his life jacket to a child even though he couldn't swim. So this was a really big deal because this is like this well-known guy all over America, this billionaire, and he dies on this ship by the Germans. Now, I want you to think about who you think was to blame for this. Do you think the British were to blame for trying to sneak weapons across on a passenger ship? Do you think the Germans were to blame for firing at the ship anyway? So like even today, people still debate, well, who really was to blame for this? So just something to think about. Now, despite the Lusitania sinking, when Woodrow Wilson was running for re-election, his big campaign promise was he kept us out of the war. And what you see here in these pictures, these are campaign buttons, and these are what people used to use to campaign. So that was his slogan. He kept us out of the war. He was telling people, if you vote for me, we're not going to involve ourselves in that war overseas. We're going to stay out of it. Well, shortly later, we do join, but he didn't intend for us to join. So, third reason America joined the war was the Zimmermann telegram. So the Zimmermann telegram was a telegram that we intercepted from Germany to Mexico, and Germany was encouraging Mexico to attack the U.S. They said, if you attack the U.S., then we will give you back all the land you lost in the Mexican-American War. Like I said, the U.S. intercepted this telegram. They were able to decode it because it was written in code and determine what Germany was urging Mexico to do. And this really severed relations with the U.S. and Germany. After this point, we're not really helping Germany much anymore. We are putting our support behind the Allies. And so this picture right here, it has a German soldier who's got a pointy helmet, got a Mexican wearing a sombrero. It says, join with Germany and you get a bit of the United States. So this is kind of what the American public viewed this as. They viewed it as like the bad guy Germany trying to convince Mexico to fight the U.S. And it really caused a lot of Americans to support going to war against Germany because of this. All right, fourth was the Russian Revolution in 1917, where the monarchy in Russia was overthrown. Now, the monarchy in Russia, you had the Tsar, Nicholas II, his wife, the Tsarina, which basically means king and queen, and you had their children. Now, Nicholas II loved his children very much, including his son, Alexei, but Alexei had hemophilia, which is, it's a disease and your blood doesn't clot. So like a small little cut can bleed for a very long time. So it's very dangerous. And in order to help Alexei, the Tsar and Tsarina hired this lovely looking individual, Rasputin, and believe it or not, people actually thought he was attractive looking back then. So they hired Rasputin, who was supposed to be a healer, to help Alexei, and they ended up welcoming him into the family. They trusted him with everything. They let him give them advice on matters of politics, war. They really trusted him. Now, the Russian people hated Rasputin. They made up rumors that he was having an affair with the Tsarina, that he was trying to sabotage all this stuff. They hated him. And that was one of the reasons they wanted to overthrow the monarchy. Another reason was because Russia had a ton of casualties in World War I. They were suffering a lot, and they wanted something done about it. They didn't feel like the Tsar was doing what he needed to. So the Tsar and his family were held hostage, basically, for a good while. The Tsar resigned. His family was held in this room right here. They were held hostage. And eventually the guards who were holding them hostage said, pack up your stuff. We're going to take you out of the country and we're going to let you go. Because they had family in other countries who were actually ruling. The Tsarina's grandma was the Queen of England at one point. So they thought they were going to escape. Now the Tsarina convinced her children to sew all their jewels and their money into their clothes, which is pretty common practice back then if you were trying to hide stuff. So they had all these diamonds and jewels sewn into their clothes. Well, right before they were about to leave, the men took the family into the basement and gunned them down with machine guns. So the entire family was murdered. And this was the room where they were gunned down. Now, the Russian government never actually admitted to what they were doing. They pretended like the Tsar and his family just escaped. And it wasn't until the Soviet Union ended that they finally admitted, yeah, we killed them all. Although Rasputin, he was killed a little before this. It didn't quite go as planned. So Rasputin, they poisoned him, but it didn't have an effect on him. They shot him 3 times, still alive. And finally, they threw his body into an icy river. And that is what finally killed him. So you can Google pictures of Rasputin, and you'll see like pictures of his body once they fished him out of the water, and you can see bullet holes in his head. 5th reason the U.S. joined the war was Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. So after all this stuff going on, after the Lusitania sinking, Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare, and they start targeting civilian ships. And this causes the U.S. to declare war in April of 1917. So the U.S. is finally in the war. All right, we're going to stop here, and we will finish up the notes next week. Hope you all are doing well. I don't know how to get out of this. Still don't know how to get out of this. Okay. All right, guys. So I will see you all next week.